إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعين به ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة وكشف الغمة وجاهد في سبيل الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين ونحن على ذلك ونشهد. أما بعد. My dearest brothers and sisters, Jazakumullah khair for tuning in for the Ask a Muslim show. I am so glad today that we have a brother that is dear to my heart, even though he does not know me much, but we follow him from a long distance, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless his effort and bless his work, brother Mohammed Hijab. I don't think I have to give a whole lot of introduction about him, because mashallah he is very known to be within Speaker Corner, and he had many debates. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless his effort and elevate his status. I don't like to talk too much about the person in front of his face, because that's not the sunnah, but we want to show our love and respect for brother Mohammed Hijab. So inshallah, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, today, my dear respected brothers and sisters, we're going to be talking about one of the sensitive topics that, unfortunately, not a whole lot of Muslims would know about, which is how could we prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through only one thing? And there is many evidences to prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is how to do it through one specific thing, which is objective morality. So inshallah, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, we'll take a short break, and then after that we will have the floor for our dear brother Mohammed Hijab, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. So, Jazakallah khair again, Brother Muhammad, for coming here. And may Allah subhanahu bless and reward you. So, the thing is, like I said, there is, alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is many ways for us to prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think one of it, if I wanted to kind of classify it in a right way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have put this fitrah, which is what we call the natural predisposition within us. And one of the fitrah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have put within us is objective morality. So we could jump into the subject, could you just for us briefly define to us what is objective morality? Jazakallah khair.
Jazakumullah khair for having me on the show. It's a really interesting topic, and I think it's a topic that is one of the most important ones when we're talking about God and or the existence of God. I think that morality is very relevant in people's lives, whether they want to philosophize or whether they just whether they're doing so without knowing, whether they're philosophizing without knowing. So objective morality really is, to answer your question directly, it's a proposition which says that morality is independent, it exists, it's true, and it's independent from human beings. So let me give you kind of an example to try and drive the point home. There's about 7 billion or 7 to 8 billion people on planet Earth. Mm-hmm. Most of those people would say murder is wrong. Okay, most of those people would think that, they would believe that murder is wrong. Now, murder is wrong as a proposition, right?
Right.
It can either be subjective or objective. So this is really what it comes down to. If we wanted to say it's objective, we're saying it's true, independent on human beings' thoughts and society's decrees and constructions. So if we say, for example, that there's of the 7 billion people that are on the earth, let's get rid of every single person that's on the earth. Despite the fact that human beings don't exist on the earth, would we still say murder is wrong? Mm-hmm. So murder is wrong as a proposition, whether or not human beings are there. If we establish that, okay, murder is wrong as a proposition, is wrong whether or not human beings are there, then we believe in objective morality. It's always wrong. It's eternally wrong. It's always going to be the case that it's wrong. Now, there is a difference between absolute and objective morality, which we don't want to kind of talk about now. But really, we're talking about, is there such a morality that is fixed and true? Mm-hmm. And is that morality, which is fixed and true despite human beings' constructions and the society's preferences? Mm-hmm. So if you believe in objective morality, which I'm not going to say most people do, but many people do, then you've got to ask yourself, how and why do I believe in objective morality? If you do this as an experiment, because you mentioned the fitrah, if you do this as an experiment and say, okay, well, incest is wrong, murder is wrong, rape is wrong, killing a baby is wrong. Why is it wrong? Now, if you ask why, many people that believe all of those things are wrong may not be able to give you an explanation for why that is the case. Perhaps the only explanation they have is that it's self-evidently wrong, that they intuit. In other words, they intuitively believe that it's wrong.
All right.
If that is what they say, then they're giving evidence that there is some intuitive morality which exists, and this intuitive morality is, in a sense, axiomatic. It's self-evident, and it's something which is ingrained in the human being from when they are born. Muslims, we refer to this as the fitrah. Now, if we were to approach this matter in a purely textual way, there are hadith. I mean, the Quran mentions the fitrah about 2 times. One is Surah Al-Rum, and I'm trying to think about where the other one is. But I, from my recollection, about 1 or 2 times. And in the hadith, there's these hadith which start by saying al-fitratu khams, al-fitratu ashr, that the fitrah is 5 things and 10 things. And then from a textual Islamic perspective, things like, you know, hygiene related things like, you know, shaving your pubic hairs is from the fitrah, or cleaning yourself is from the fitrah. And there are some like hadiths like this. Because quite frankly, the question is, I mean, I'm looking at a dustbin right now as we speak outside in the streets.
Okay.
Most people prefer cleanliness to dirtiness. Okay, most people prefer cleanliness to dirtiness. Almost every civilization values hygiene and values cleanliness almost as an independent fact. Now the question is, why is that the case? Why is there almost an aesthetic, intuitive value for cleanliness over dirtiness? Now, you can philosophize all you want, but I think probably one of the best answers one can give is that it's intuitive.
Right.
So if we say it's intuitive, that we self-evidently believe that cleanliness is preferred over dirtiness, then really it's a fitra. It's a fitri, or it's a intuitive feeling. And this is one of the epistemologically fine ways of proving something's existence, by intuiting it, by knowing it as a fact, self-evidently. That is actually an epistemologically valid way of reasoning. And so if someone believes, now going to the topic of today, if someone believes in these objective moralities and believes in these things that we naturally believe in, the question is, from whence or from where did this come from? How are we endowed with this belief that certain morality is right and certain morality is wrong, that cleanliness is good and dirtiness is bad? Where did this come from? Where did this come? So an evolutionary biologist may say, well, that was an evolutionary byproduct. But there's really many problems with that theory.
Right.
Because evolution doesn't really, it doesn't speculate on morality, in the sense that there's only 2 things which evolutionarily matter. Number 1 is survival, and number 2 is reproduction. Now, and this is something many people have actually mentioned in the book Darwinian Fairy Tales. This is something I remember reading. Like empathy and certain moralities which we can very easily say is part of the human condition and is cross-cultural. Empathy and being loving and being merciful for other people, is not necessarily congruent with an evolutionary model, because it doesn't fit into a survival mechanism or a reproduction mechanism, really and truly. What matters most for a subject, an evolutionary biological subject, is survival and reproduction. So the development of certain moralities, like that rape is wrong or that murder is wrong, is not necessarily easily argued to be evolutionary, because it doesn't fit in the remit. So a lot of morality doesn't make sense on evolutionary reductionist models. And that's why now
they found like a gene that is signal that is produced, or a protein that is produced for empathy or love or etc. I mean that's another. I'm looking at, because I got, when we were undergrad, when we were just studying biology, there's no such thing that exists that we wish that يعني the human body would produce that, okay, this protein wallahi is going to make you love a person more than another, or an empathy, or etc.
Right.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
what,
yeah. So So just to summarize on this point, it's just in terms of the best explanation for the existence of objective morality. If one, and this is important. I mean, the reason why I don't use this as an argument is because it depends upon the person who I'm speaking with. If the person says, I believe in objective morality as an intuitive starting point, then I will ask them from whence or from where did this come from? Where did this, and what is the best explanation for the fact that you have a set of codes, moral codes, objective moral codes in their understanding, and not only that, also aesthetic value judgments, things like we talked about dirt versus cleanliness, many other things like this. What is the best explanation for the existence of those things? And if they cite evolutionary things, then we'll say, hey, these things don't fit in within the kind of reproduction / survival mechanism. Therefore, a theistic model, or the fact that you have an all-knowing being that's endowing human beings with these feelings or with these intuitions, in a way to try and gear them for human civility, that would be the best explanation.
Some atheists say actually that, like, for instance, the concept of moral realism, it's just there. I mean, how would you respond to that, Akhi?
Yeah, so look, if it's just there, here's the problem: from whence did it? Where did it come from? It is just there, but where did it come from? It's not from saying it's just there. It's not giving an explanation as to its existence. It's a for existence and its continued existence. Right. It's not really an explanation. To say it's like Bertrand Russell famously said, the universe just is. Well, the universe just is. Okay, that's not a good explanation as to where it came from, or where the beginnings of the universe were, or if it was always as it is. I mean, the universe just is basically telling us what we already know. Okay, so where is the explanation? So I don't think that's really an interrogation. I would say to them, it's not whether you're a realist or anti-realist. If you're saying that morality is just there, it doesn't really fix any problems, and it doesn't give us any explanations.
What about if people say, well, things have developed over time, society, or for instance, like some people say who have the stance of ethical relativism, they're just, from one culture to another, morality may differ. What would be a good response to that, I think?
We would say, look, there are things which for the most part have stayed, and the question would be, is it significant? And this is my question that I would put to these people. Right. Is it significant, the fact that society has exhibited similar traits in terms of moral reasoning for 5,000 years? For example, most societies have been religious. Most societies have glorified a deity. Now, whether there is a monotheistic deity or a polytheistic deity, the idea of veneration and worship has always existed for 5,000, 6,000 years of human civilization. Sure. Moral codes, moral codes have existed for as long as human civilization has existed. And within moral codes, you have certain things which are most likely to be cross-cultural than other things. Now, is it significant or is it insignificant that you have such continuities from culture to culture, from place to place, time and place? Now, if you say, no, it's not significant or it's coincidental, then that would be almost attributing this whole process to randomness or to healthy coincidences. I don't think there are these kinds of coincidences. If it's significant, the question is, has the human disposition, has the human psychological disposition, does it have a propensity to worship, to venerate, and to create or to espouse certain moralities? Right. And in such moralities, are there cross-cultural and cross-generational continuities which we may say exist and have done so for millennia? And if there are cross-cultural and cross-generational continuities, the question is, how can that be explained that there are those similarities? And we would say that a healthy explanation, I think a very good explanation would be that the human psychology has intuitive basically moralities that it churns out as standard, and sometimes they can take different forms depending on society, and sometimes there can be an overlap. And that's why there's always been a healthy discussion between the nature versus nurture debate. What are we born with versus what are we taught? And sometimes I will admit, and this is something Ibn Taymiyyah wrote in a book he wrote called Dar'u Ta'arud bil Aqli wa Naql. He said that really there are some things which you may think are intuitive, are fitri, but are actually social constructs. Because when you are living in a society which has complex moralities and lots of discussions, sometimes you can confuse something which is socially constructed with something that you think is meant to be intuitive. For example, many people might think it's common sense for men and women to be treated in an absolutely equal way. And they may even believe that that's intuitive, but it's not intuitive. That's clearly a social construct. And why is it so clearly a social construct? It's because that's not something which people have been saying for millennia. It's something that people have been saying for about 50 to 60 years in the way that they are saying it, in the form of second wave feminism. So if it was something so intuitive, they would have been saying it for thousands of years. It doesn't have cross-cultural currency. Okay. And so so that's I think a very fair way of identifying things which may be seen as social constructs or not. If they are new, if they are something which humanity has found is recent, then there is more reason to believe it's not intuitive. Because if it was intuitive, why is it that we have a whole historical track record of people not exhibiting this behavior, and it's only newly exhibited behavior? So the longer the track record one has, and the more cross-generational and cross-cultural something is, the more likely we can attribute it to intuitive psychological processes. Right. The less that is the case, the less likely you can attribute it. And that's a very common sense, I would believe, analysis.
So the thing is, I guess one question would come into mind, Akhi, is like, can this objective morality be masked? Like, for instance, sometime, like, the era of Hitler, many people, this could have been, could this be changed over time, or this is just, or according to your argument, it's just an exception to when it comes to our argument?
Yeah, so no, objective morality would not be able to be, if you believe in objective morality, you don't think it's something which is changeable, okay? It's not something which is changeable. Now, it depends on, there's a fine distinction between objective morality and absolute morality. For example, if we're talking about morality as per Islamic ethics, there is a scope for consequentialism there. Because, for example, and this might be a little bit confusing to many people, because consequentialism is sometimes seen as antithetical to objective morality. I would say it's not the case. Categorical morality, what Kant referred to as categorical imperatives, okay, is where you believe something is always wrong and that thing can never be right. So, for example, lying. He actually famously gave the example of lying. So Immanuel Kant believed in something called categorical imperatives, and he said that lying is always wrong. So one of his detractors came and said, well, hold on, if someone comes and knocks on the door, and some people, let's say some very evil people are looking to kill the woman's husband, and he asks her at the door, is your husband home? Because they want to go in and kill him. And if she says yes, he's home, they're going to come in and kill him. So in that case, is it legitimate to lie? In other words, are the consequences such that they would warrant a change in the morality? Now, categorical imperatives, okay, you'd say no. So Kant would actually say you can never lie. Even in this situation, you shouldn't lie. Even in this situation, you shouldn't lie. Whereas the Islamic model is not like this.
Sure.
I mean, there is actually a hadith that says, لا يحل الكذب إلا في ثلاث. That lying is not allowed except for three circumstances. One of them is al-harbu khid'a, war is deception. One of them is that a husband, a spouse. There's two ways here. One that says a husband speaking to his wife. Another one saying, and also the wife speaking to her husband in Sahih Muslim. And the third one is to make kind of sulh, or if you like, reconciliation between two parties. One thing that is a line of best fit between those three things is that all three of them, the consequences of lying are basically less than the evils that may happen from not lying. So going back to Kant's example, you know, if the woman said to, because this is another, really, it's like darura, Islamic terminology, it's like a case of life and death. Right. Islamically, she wouldn't be at fault if she said, no, he's not here, even though he is there, because she's saving someone's life. Right. But that is within the greater picture of an objective Islamic morality. So there is an objective morality, but I would say within that objective morality, there's an inbuilt flexibility, and there's something I refer to as, in some of my writings, Sharia consequentialism. But then someone could argue, how could you have consequentialist thinking within a religious paradigm if it's the case that you have objective morality? My answer would be, and I think this is a definitive answer, that the objective morality is the flexibility itself. So in other words, what is the rule on lying? If you wanted to put an Islamic position, lying is wrong, except for, but there are exceptions. So the entire proposition becomes objectively moral. It's not just lying is wrong, full stop. Lying is wrong if you wanted to put the entire corpus, except for in those three circumstances we've given, and also life or death situation, for example, or something which could harmly warrant one of the five darurat, for example, one of the five things, like, for example, impoverish someone, or someone lying will cause great harm to their body, or things like that. Those five things are possibly exceptions. Now, what we're saying is that whole proposition is objective morality. So objective morality is not just the idea that lying is wrong. It's objective morality on the Islamic perspective is lying is wrong, but there are some exceptions. So it's not if and only if, it's there are some exceptions. So that's why it's important not to say to believe, as Muslims, we don't believe that objective morality is the same as categorical morality. So categorical morality is a proposition which can always be wrong, and there's no way of navigating through that, like lying is wrong. There's no exceptions to that. But we don't have that. We do have an inbuilt flexibility, and we have something which I refer to as Sharia consequentialism. But that Sharia consequentialism itself is the objective morality. So if someone says, why is it the case that you can have changing in rulings, for example? Because in nawazil, or what we call situational times, where, you know, there can be a change in the ruling. Right. But that is facilitated by the objective morality itself. So that's how I would kind of categorize the Islamic system.
Beautiful. So now the next thing I wanted to touch point upon is the issue of some people would say, well, many people think that the objective morality comes from the issue of harm. Like, you know, people develop that from, you know, they think that, you know, and which comes into the harm principle. Can you guide us on this?
Yeah, so in liberal thought, which is, I mean, liberalism first and foremost is the dominant ethic. It is the dominant ethic, which is, it's the dominant ethic in the West. I'm just getting a drink of water. So liberalism is the dominant ethic in the West, and it's expressed most rampantly in its social form. So it's called social liberalism. And liberalism, I mean, if you could actually, some scholars have defined liberalism through the harm principle. So liberalism, this idea which basically America has adopted and the European countries for the most part have adopted, can be defined through the harm principle, that you are free to do anything you like so long as you don't harm anyone else. Now, that's an ethic which comes from something called utilitarianism. Now, utilitarianism is that you've got two gods, pain and pleasure. You want to try and increase as much pleasure and decrease as much pain. That's life. And the best kind of morality is the greatest number of pleasure for the greatest number of people, and the aversion of as much pain as possible for as many for the greatest number of people. That's basically the morality. So that's their God, and that closely correlates with what Allah says in the Quran. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who takes his desires as his Lord? You know, ta'isa abdul dinari wa dirham, that Cursed be to the one who is literally the slave of the dinar and the dirham, which are two currencies. So the slave of money. Basically, these two hadiths are a refutation of social and economic liberalism, if you think about it. Because economic liberalism is based on capitalistic models. The more money you get, the more successful you are.
Right.
And the verse in the Quran is kind of a refutation of social liberalism, that it's all about your desires. Now, this ethic, it doesn't have really a way of proving itself objectively. With the admission of those people who espouse it, like J.S. Mill, they don't really have a mechanism of proving how is it the case that actually you can that is the best thing for humanity, right. the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Ironically, when someone tries to find happiness just and left to their own devices, they're not able to do it. And so once again, ironically, the most depressed countries are usually the most liberal ones, if we're looking at it psychologically, and also sociologically. So in a nutshell, this is the idea. The idea is that you can do whatever you want so long as you don't harm anyone else. It comes from this utilitarian base, or this what you call hedonistic base. The idea that, it's a bestial, like, do whatever you want. It's all about satisfying your desires. And it's weaker than a spider's web from an epistemological perspective.
So what about, there's one common argument that a lot of us tend to use is the fact that if there is no objective morality, so what's the point of being good? What is evil? Yes. So because at the end of the day, from the Islamic perspective, we do things because we expect a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, or even in the dunya. The same thing if someone that does evil. So the question here, Akhi, is if you could comment on that, please. Because the thing is, if there is no objective morality, there is no, what is considered to be good, what is considered to be bad, and what's the purpose behind everything?
Absolutely, and it's ironic sometimes that atheists, actually, one of the most, if not the most positive objection to theism from atheists is the problem of evil. They'll say, how could there be a God when there's so much evil in the world?
Right.
In fact, I actually read a book recently by Graham Oppy, one of the major academics on atheism, and he speaks about these matters. He's a philosopher of religion, and it's 100%. And he's actually called the best arguments against God. That's what he called the book. So this is meant to be like a small booklet which gives you the best arguments against God. And I looked at it, and basically none of them were arguments against God except for one. He only had one positive argument against God, and that positive argument against God was the problem of evil. But Graham Oppy, just like many of the people, don't believe evil exists. How can there be a problem of evil when evil doesn't exist? Like, right. The problem here is if you don't believe in, they're saying on your worldview,
right?
If evil exists, and how could there, if God exists, and how could there be evil in the world? First, this is a very interesting question, but a question that they have no right to question, because they'd have to first prove the existence of evil. On their model, it doesn't exist in the real world.
Okay.
So, yeah, I find that's the first thing. The second thing is, like you said, if it's like there's no such thing as objective morality, which a lot of them will admit. Richard Dawkins admits this in The Blind Watchmaker. He says there's no good, there's no evil, there's only pitiless indifference. Sam Harris doesn't believe there's intrinsic good and evil. He mentions this in The Moral Landscape. He doesn't believe there's objective moral evil. And so all of these individuals, the implication of that is that we're just floating carbon, like we're just carbon creatures. Anything that happens to us is just a rearrangement of carbon and atoms. That there's no, if you like my brother Sabur Ahmed, my friend of mine here in the UK, he always says it's like having a snowman. And if, a snowman, if you get an axe and cut the head off a snowman, on this worldview, there's no similarity or difference between cutting the head of a human being or even a baby. All of it is exactly the same epistemologically, if that's what one believes. So these are ridiculous things, and most people would not accept that. But then the question is, why don't you accept it when you have no evidence for evil existing, except for that intuitive thing that you're trying to suppress? So these are some of the arguments I would put forward.
I wanted to share kind of with this because thing is, I want people to understand the consequences of not believing such thing. This one time a question was asked to Richard Dawkins. He said, and this is the question. He said, but ultimately, your belief in that rape is wrong is arbitrary, as the fact that we've evolved 5 fingers rather than 6. And his answer was, yeah, you could say that. So I find that it's very, and even to Richard Dawkins, like the issue of rape is like, okay, so what? And even if you the same question, almost the same kind of saying was done by Sam Harris. He said, if you could wave a magic wand and get rid of either rape or religion, he said, I would not hesitate to get rid of religion. Subhanallah, and these people have, when you have no moral standards, anything is a free game to them, whether it was rape, whether it was even pedophilia, and according to Richard Dawkins, subhanallah.
Well, these people are all propagandists. They are intentionally trying to create controversy, and that's fine. They can do it. But really, Richard Dawkins now is a 78-year-old man. He's lost touch with his base. That's why he's having to bring younger people in, like Ricky Gervais, into his Richard Dawkins Foundation. He's quickly become irrelevant, quite frankly. Quickly, especially to younger audiences, and it's especially because he's been humiliated he's actually been thoroughly humiliated in the academic spheres. And I've written a book. It's a small booklet actually, called The Scientific Deceptions of the New Atheists. This can be found on the Sapiens Institute website. You can download it for free. It's called The Scientific Deceptions of the New Atheists. You can download a PDF of that, and you can see, because I'm not just saying this as a matter of opinion or anecdote. This, I've put in there, data points, data sets, that how many people used to listen to him first when he brought out the God Delusion compared to now when he brought out his most recent book. How many people bought those books? How many people had the hype was around them, and now how the hype has literally almost gone. I mean, quite frankly, I think that the Islamic dawah is at least on a social media level, is starting to outstrip the new atheists online.
By the grace of Allah.
By the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and these people. So they have not been able to confront Muslims properly, and in fact, none of them have had debates with Muslims except for Christopher Hitchens, who had a debate with Tariq Ramadan. That was a long time ago. But so they can continue doing it, but they've lost. They've been humiliated in their own arenas, because people like Michael Roos, a very strong philosopher, has basically humiliated Richard Dawkins and he's an atheist himself. Michael Roos says Richard Dawkins makes me ashamed to be an atheist. He says that. Yeah, that's what he says. He makes me ashamed, and he says the reason why he makes me ashamed is because one of his biggest. I read the God Delusion. The God Delusion, I've read it. He said I read the God Delusion, and I was waiting to see some new philosophical insight, only to realize, and I'm paraphrasing him, only to realize that one of his biggest things that he was saying was that who created God was his biggest argument. Like he said, like an undergraduate person, like a sophomore, like an undergraduate who's just he thinks he's found the bee's knees, but he hasn't. He's just he's saying something like maybe an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old would be able to ask that question. So it's like there's no substance there. So in these Pigliucci, another person, a very famous academic, absolutely rips to shreds. Elliot Sober, another academic, rips to shreds this kind of beliefs. I mean, Anthony Kenny, an Oxford philosopher, he was correcting him when he had his debate with Archbishop of Canterbury. He had a debate with him, is correcting him, confusing agency and mechanism, and the guy is all over the place. And that's why he, by the way, for the record, he always rejected debates with philosophers or people who are trained in philosophy, like William Lane Craig. He always rejected that because he knew that he was not good in philosophy. He knew that he doesn't know what he's talking about, that he's basically completely out of his depths. And he admits this. He goes, I'm not good at philosophy. And people will know that. And people started laughing at him in the auditorium when he said this, because he was being thoroughly humiliated. So we shouldn't really give these individuals too much weight as if they have any say. atheism is not as big as we think it is. Really, was agnosticism is bigger than atheism. People just they don't, the irreligiosity, they don't no longer want to identify as Christian. But it's not that people are walking around saying, I don't believe in God, and how could there be a God in the world? There's probably 5% of UK, for example, maybe 7% of America, maybe even less than that. There's a lot of people who are irreligious, but not firm atheists. So, you know, once again, I think a lot of the fitrah, despite all of this corruption and the new atheist propaganda and liberalism, and the fitrah has remained intact for the most part. Like, there's a Pew study that was done in America. 90% of people in America, which is one of the biggest studies that was done, religious studies that was done in the last 20 years in America, 90% of participants responded that they believe in a higher power in America. 90%. And by the way, the majority of them don't believe it's Jesus Christ. Majority of them, even though the majority of them are meant to identify as Christian. There was even a study that was done that identified evangelical, I think 30 to 40% of evangelical Christians doubt the fact that Jesus is God. So the fitrah is so strong that, you know, this idea of the intuitive, the predisposition, that you're born believing in God and morality and these things is so strong that it literally encroaches on the most atheistic and liberal societies, the most materialistic of societies. And that's why, I mean, I've mentioned this study before, but, you know, Justin Barrett, when he done this in 2011 in the Oxford Anthropological Society, when they done one of the biggest studies, which was cross-cultural studies in the world that had been done at that time. They put a lot of money into that studies, and they did it on children. And the conclusion of that study is that he says, Justin Barrett says, Dr. Justin Barrett, he says that, you know, the majority of people are born believing in a higher power. That is a fact. I mean, this is his, he calls it an innate receptivity to believing in God. These are strong, sound academic, points, data sets, which we have been able to gather in the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, which indicate to the truthfulness of the Islamic narrative. All of this really strongly indicates to the truthfulness of the Islamic narrative. Because no one is born believing Jesus is God, right? No one is born believing, no one is born believing in the particulars of a religion either. I mean, even like, oh, Prophet Muhammad is the Prophet Muhammad's messenger, and, you know, the 5 pillars of Islam. We're not saying that people are born like that. We're saying that people are born believing and even having a submission, venerating, you know, glorifying, you know, one God. And this is backed by the data. This is backed by the data. And that's, I think, a very important point. We have all this data on our side, and they really do have to take that seriously.
SubhanAllah. والله متم نوره ولو كره الكافرون. SubhanAllah. يعني Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to shed his light even if people like it or dislike it. SubhanAllah. I wanted to kind of, again, I'm sure you saw this, Brother Muhammad, is like this video by Lawrence Krauss, in which that he was once asked about the incest. And I wanted to kind of share with everyone so people could say, again, the consequences of this.
Why is incest wrong? It's not clear to me that it's wrong. Okay. It's clear to me there's never no. Listen to me.
So this is the consequences of this, subhanallah, in which that, if to them, again, whether it was rape, whether it was bestiality, whether it was pedophilia, it's all a fair game. It doesn't really matter, what is considered to be right or wrong. Because the thing is, I wanted to stress this point, because a lot of people, they're just, especially the weak Muslims, they're in this hype. They think, oh, wallah, we're not being restrained by any sort of moral. We could do whatever we want to do, etc. And they don't know the consequences of this, unfortunately. Subhanallah. And again, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, people sometimes they wanted to make this zina. They wanted to beautify atheism. Oh, you're free to do whatever you want. Oh, it's you have no restrictions whatsoever. But I think at the end of the day, there is all this illusion. There is many bad consequences that come after this.
Absolutely, and that's a very good point. Practically, what is the life of an atheist look like?
Sure.
And something that I think is important as well is nihilism becomes one of the the byproducts or the end goals of this. Which nihilism is the idea that life is basically meaningless. There's no value to life, and this is very depressing and pessimistic. I mean, I want people to think about, who are listening to this. If you are on your deathbed, on your sick bed, yeah, and you have this belief, there is zero hope. There is zero hope. If you die, there's no afterlife. I mean, you can say, well, this is not a logical argument. I'm not even making a logical argument. I'm just talking about the psychological implications, like you're talking about, right? So if you're on your sick bed, your deathbed, and you've got cancer, and you're on stage 5 cancer or stage 4, whatever it is, and the doctor's saying you don't have long left, and you're just imagine yourself, or someone who you love is in that position, and what are you going to say to them? About 10 years ago, I had a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, maybe more than that. I was in school at that time. I was in college, and I had a friend of mine whose mother died, and he was an atheist, and so was she. And I don't know why he came to me. At those times, we had MSN Messenger. I don't know if you remember MSN Messenger.
Yeah.
That was
all day, man.
MSN. That one, maybe the younger kids listening to this thing will not know what we're talking about. But he was like, you could see that he was chatting to me on MSN Messenger. So I started speaking to him. He goes, "Look, my mum died. What shall I do? What do you recommend? What shall I say in the in the speech?" And do you know when he asked me that question? What? Both of us basically went blank in it. Like, I didn't know what to say to him, and he didn't know what to. I said, I have to go. Just say. I said, just say we'll miss her, this, that, and let's focus on the good, positive. I didn't know at that age and at that time, I didn't know what to advise him. I mean, if it was a Muslim, I'd know exactly what to say. Inshallah, this and sadaqah jariyah, and it's so beautiful that death can become meaningful if you are a religious person, and it becomes completely meaningless, and you become like toilet flushed into the toilet, under the toilet, like pool going under. Yeah, khalas, you are one with the earth again, and become dust. Yeah, that is the materialist view. It's such a I'm not saying therefore God exists. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying what a depressing life that is. What a depressing. Not only are they wrong, but their belief system is so depressing. I mean, they're wrong, and they're causing depression as well to people with this kind of thing.
Let me end with this example, Brother Mohammed. Allah Al-Azim, this happened to me 2 weeks ago. Okay, I was beside the patient, and this patient he had to go into hemodialysis because he lost both of his kidneys. Okay. So we told him, you have to go into hemodialysis because otherwise it's going to save your life, and he was disagreeing. He said, no, there's no point whatsoever. So I tried to use like a kind of a human argument, tell him that, maybe in the future there is, you might have hope, etc. And I asked him, like, part of this trying to persuade him to accept to go into hemodialysis. I said, do you believe in God? He said, no. He said, and then he said, why should I believe in God? Because of the fact that there is so much evil. Look at the coronavirus, and there is no point for me to believe in God. Allah, I think at that point, he like literally slapped me in the face because how can I convince him? He wanted to literally commit suicide indirectly by not accepting medical treatment, and I had no argument against it because the thing is, I told him, at the end of the day, I told him, brother, or I told him, look, I have an answer for you, but I can't. It's going to take a little bit of time for me to explain. But that's the point. That's what's the point of the life from the beginning? If you believe that, wallahi, God is evil, or billah, there is no right or wrong, or etc. It makes your life really meaningless whatsoever. I guess that's the main reason why many atheists they end up committing suicides, like you have mentioned before. In one of the, you will see this is very common in countries where atheism is a predominant belief. So,
like Scandinavian countries, Sweden,
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin, at the end of the day, of the ni'mah of the Islam, and this is something that we should be
beautiful.
يعني والله
And
العظيم
this reminds me of one beautiful hadith that is probably one of my favorite hadiths. You know, عجبا لأمر المؤمن. You know, wondrous is the affair of the believer. إن أمره كله له خير. And all of his affair is good. And this is a key part. It says وليس ذاك لأحد إلا للمؤمن. And this is not granted to anybody except for the believer. In أصابته سراء شكر وإن أصابته ضراء صبر وشكر. That if good befalls him, then he is thankful, and if bad befalls him, then he is patient and he's thankful. So it's a win-win situation for us. It really is. And for them, it's a lose-lose situation. It's a zero-sum game. And the beautiful thing is, وَلَيْسَ ذَاكَ لِأَحَدٍ إِلَّا لِلْمُؤْمِنِ. The Prophet said this is not granted to anybody except for the true believer. You know, because really, the beautiful thing about Islam, from a psychological perspective, two things which will be paradigm shifting, game changing to anybody's life. Two things. Number one, it makes sense of pain. And number two, it gives purpose to death. Can you imagine? The two biggest fears of human being. Islam has a way for you to be kind of cured of that, or the existential angst that one may have is gone, or at least is dissipated, or at least is soothed with some very reaffirming things. It makes sense of pain, and it also gives purpose to death. And these are the two things that all human beings are afraid of. Every human being is going to be afraid of those two things. And that's why if we go back to our roots and become true believers, we'll be courageous people, because people that are not afraid of death, are not afraid of the next life, that realize that the end of this life is the beginning of the next, are more willing to do certain things than individuals who are all concerned with this life and not the next life. Because the Prophet, so the Quran says, يَوَدُّ أَحَدُهُمْ أَن يُعَمَّرُ أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ وَمَا هُوَ بِمُزَحْزِحِهِ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ أَن يُعَمَّرَ. That one of them wishes that he lives for 1,000 years, and that this individual will not be able to avert the punishment such that he will be able to live for that long. So in other words, individuals who have this strictly materialistic worldview and are concerned with life in this way are going to be constantly disappointed in life. Constantly disappointed. Pain is just life. It's bad luck. It's life giving you a smack in the face to tell you that there's and that slap in the face has zero meaning whatsoever. I would hate to live a life in this world which is like that. I would hate to live a life where I wake up with a migraine and I go to sleep with a migraine and I have an argument with someone in my family, let's say, and then I go to work and have an argument with someone there, and then I have and then I get angry. Sometimes I feel angry, sometimes I feel sad, sometimes I feel this, and no meaning is made of any of that. No meaning is made of any of that. That is just, on the materialistic worldview, bad luck. Bad luck that you feel it this way. You're not going to be rewarded. There's a verse in the Quran, I think it's isbiru aw la tasbiru sawa'un alaykum. Be patient or don't be patient, it's the same. That's talking about the hereafter. Allah is talking about what happens when you're punished in the hellfire. But for these atheists, they've made that the case for their dunya as well. That whether you're patient or not patient, it doesn't matter. Whether you're patient or not patient, pain is going to be the end result. Whether you're patient or not patient is pain, and the pain has no purpose. They say they'll try and comfort themselves with sayings like, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But the fact of the matter is, that's not always the case. Sometimes something is not going to kill you, and it's not going to make you stronger. It's not going to make you more mentally tough, and certainly it's not going to make you any more physically tough, especially if we're talking about physical and mental disorder. So it's not killing you, but it's chipping you. It's chipping away at you, and it's meaningless and it's painful. What kind of life is that? And that's why I would say to an atheist, this is a really important point when you talk about the existential reality of their existence. What kind of life are they leading? They have no evidence for their worldview, and their worldview is causing that much pain, why would anyone want to be an atheist? It's the least attractive thing, the least attractive position I can imagine. It's the least attractive. It's disgusting. It makes me sick just thinking about it. It makes me feel depressed just thinking about it. It gives me shivers. It makes me feel lonely. Imagine me being at night by myself in a dark place, thinking there's no God, thinking that, you know, if I was to be killed, that would be the end. What a depressing reality that is. What a horrible life that would be.
سبحان الله. هو الذي جعل لكم الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. فسبحان الله يعني again والله العظيم يا إخوان, this is just being born a Muslim or knowing the reason why you live or what's your purpose in this life. Wallahi, it's one of the biggest ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given all of us. Wallahi, if we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala day and night, and if we don't sleep praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this ni'mah, wallahi al-azim, we would not be able to pay it back. So with this being said, again, jazakallah khair, brother Muhammad Hijab. I wanted to maybe talk to you for a little bit after this is finished. But jazakallah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of the people who have watched this, and jazakallah khair, brother Muhammad Hijab, for coming and being with us. This is again a great honor. And jazakumullah khair. Subhanaka wa hamdika nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wal 'asr, inna al-insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu bis-salihati wa tawassaw bil-haqqi wa tawassaw bis-sabr. Jazakumullah khair.